Welcome, everybody, to the CCC podcast. Glad you're with us. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Doing all right. I have a little bit of a cold.
Sound a little scratchy there, Ed.
Yeah.
I feel a little scratchy.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Are we properly distanced?
I don't think so. Nope, you're not.
I don't know. So I'm going to move this way.
We are properly distanced. I'm doing
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah, you're doing okay. All right.
They are all properly distanced.
Yes. Absolutely. And for lots of other reasons.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
are.
it's not just for that.
Always.
That's
They
not
are.
just for
All
that.
right.
I'm not sick. Anybody wondering, I'm not sick. It's just this time of year, allergies.
Allergies.
I have it every year. I have a journal. I can show you. Long before the time of COVID, I was sick on these days.
Wow.
Every
Just
year.
like every year. The same
Every
time.
year, I can look on my journal. These weeks in July, I have drainage and,
Dang.
yep, I have to really try to watch, not get sore throats and all that
Mm.
stuff.
Okay.
All right.
All right. We'll keep this as short as possible, which for us is who knows how that
Yeah,
knows?
who knows?
All
Who
right.
knows what's going to happen? We gave up on that a while ago.
Yes, we did. All right. We're going to answer some questions.
All right.
We had some questions. The first one was actually sent to us. So let's get right to it. Listener wants to know, why do you think there were name changes in the Old and New Testaments? And they give an example, which is a good example. In the Old Testament, Abram's name was changed to Abraham. His wife Sarai was changed to Sarah. And they even mentioned that there were some of those as well in the New Testament, and they just want to know, why is that? Why do people get name changes in the Bible?
Witness protection.
What?
Nah, well,
That's
maybe,
what I think. I
Maybe,
think it may be witness protection.
maybe that's what it was.
That's a good answer.
Who knows?
But not the
That's
correct
what we're
one.
leaving with. Nah.
Running away from bills.
Yeah.
That works in our day as well.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
all right. What I've noticed and been taught over the years is a lot of these instances, when there is an actual change of name, it has a lot to do with a change of a role in their life, or some type of major event happens in someone's life, and so the name change signifies the before the event versus after the event. That is certainly the example of Abram that you asked. That's certainly why that change was done. Ed, you said you looked up some information about
I
that.
didn't get a chance to look all the stuff I wanted to look up, but
Okay.
I understand that it has the indication of father to exalted father, or father,
Okay, so you're talking specifically about
Abraham, and it has something to do with the name of God. I can remember being taught that. I did not have time to look it up, though.
Yeah.
We could have. Sorry,
Well, and
sorry, I don't have a more definitive answer.
Well, and I
on
think
that.
if you look back at the story, you see that the name change for Abraham happened from the moment that God makes him the promise and
It's a
speaks to
covenant.
him. Yeah, the covenant's made, and then the name gets changed. So,
Well, and there's a level to Abram almost feels there's a sense of irony even to his name in that part of the story of his name begins by meaning father. He's not a father. So
Right.
there's a lot, I mean, that's central to his story. Then at the moment he gets his name changed is at this point where he's calling out to God and almost saying, you're not coming through on your promises. I thought you were. God promises I'll make you the father of many nations. He gets this name change. His wife gets a name change. Also, Jacob changed to Israel
Yep.
after he wrestles with an
God.
angel or with God, right? In that, in very kind of in this dream, literal kind of thing, and then they change his name to He Who Wrestles with God, kind of thing. So all of that. So as you said, I think that's probably the most clear answer to it is that there's a change of there's a significant event. There's a role change. There's a part that you're playing in the story that's different than it was.
well, in the
before.
ancient times, names were very significant in describing you or your family of origin, or certainly a life trajectory that much more than our day. People like to get into what names mean, but most people don't know or don't care. For
Right.
the most part, they certainly aren't significant to us. Not so back then; it was a little more significant. I think the questioner also wanted to know about some of the New Testament examples of this, and the ones they didn't cite them, but I know probably what they're talking about is there's Peter. Seems to go through some type of a name change, and also Paul went from Saul to Paul, and they changed calling him, which those are not as cut and dried as the answer we just gave. As we were talking before we went live here, a lot of that has to do with sometimes they'll call him by a Greek name, sometimes by a Hebrew name, and that was the reason for that. So when you've got languages being spoken,
That's right.
multiple languages.
Yeah,
that's
Matthew
and Levi. Yeah, same person, different name because of different language. And of course, Peter, you've got
There's an
Jesus
event.
making a point in
That's
the
right.
event. In that passage where he says, Simon, Peter, you're called Simon, but now Peter meaning rock, and then he uses the example, upon this rock I'll build my church. So that was a significant event, and I also think Saul and Paul is the Hebrew and Greek issue, right?
That's right.
Yep.
He takes
That's
his
right.
Roman citizen when he's as
Yes.
a Roman citizen. He's Paul, and using that because he saw his role as the calling to go to the Gentiles, to go to be the apostle to non-Jewish people, and so Saul was his Jewish name.
Okay, so that's it.
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's a
though.
great
It was
question.
I think it's very
question.
confusing to
Somebody
lots of
paying
people.
attention when they're reading.
Yeah,
Something
that's right.
we can get in and get out real quick. So,
Oh, and
thank you for that.
sometimes you'll see Peter referred to as Cephas. I just thought of that when you said that,
True,
which is
you will.
also that's his Hebrew or Aramaic
yeah.
version of the word for rock. So
Yep. All right. Next question, and this was something that was asked not sent in, but just a conversation that I think you had, Ed.
I
this
did.
past week, and someone had asked the question, basically about how we got, or how the books of the Bible were included, and which ones were not included, because as many people have. You do a little research, and there are some ancient books that are floating around out there. There's a Gospel of Mary. There's a Gospel of Judas, I believe.
Gospel of Thomas.
Thomas. There's a book of Enoch somewhere.
I
and-
think there's a Gospel of Jesus.
Okay. There's lots of those floating around, and as we know, they are not included in our 66 books of the canon, what we call the Bible. Canon's a technical word, but that included in our Bible. And they were really wanting to know, why is that? Why are some of those books excluded? So let's give the quick answer on that, if we can.
The answer I gave to the person was, there was a council. Every History Channel, the Da Vinci Code, everybody points to the Council of Nicaea, where they all came together and they decided on the books. And it sounds conspiratorial, but really all they were doing was codifying what had already been decided as the books. I mean, that's 300 years later. Even these books that are being written, some of them are called pseudepigrapha books, which pseudepigrapha, pseudo means false. Pigrapha means writing. So, and it's a actual style of writing. Like we talk about apocrypha writing. There are people, we'd call it ghost writing in our day, but often ghost writers are in on it with the real author. These were people who were writing things in the name and the spirit of something, And this is a terrible illustration. The illustration I use with the person, because it happened around the time of the Hamilton thing being released, is Alexander Hamilton was not a black man who rapped.
right.
But that thing is written pseudepigrapha with some history alongside. There is some history, and then there's some other stuff that's dramatic that's added to it. Not everything that happens nor is said was said by Alexander Hamilton. So that was a style of writing that was not only about Jesus. There were pseudepigrapha books written by Roman emperors. The reason we don't have more copies of those is nobody cared about the emperors after Rome was overturned. People did care about Jesus, so these other books were carried along. But it wasn't like there was a big controversy.
And it wasn't like the church was using them as scripture
ever.
in the first 100, 200 years.
No, they were never doing that.
Yeah.
Well, that's particularly what is remarkable about the Bible, and in particular these 66 books that we do have, is one, that there is so much consensus at the time that these are the books that are important, and these are the letters, right? So a lot of the New Testament things are letters.
And authorship was verified.
Right. They knew these are the ones. So one, there's this consensus, but two, that we have as many copies as we do. And if you've seen kind of any study of that, you've seen we have an enormous and almost reasonable amount compared to other things. There are not other ancient documents that you would look at and go, this is just so much higher. But the reason why is because these were more than just letters. They were letters and they were getting written, but they immediately recognized there is something, what we would refer to as scripture about them, that these are what we refer to as God breathed, that they look at this and says, these are people who had been with Jesus. So they either were, apostles who had been with Jesus, or they had been with people who had been with Jesus, like Luke, who writes the book of Luke and the book of Acts, had done eyewitness testimony and had spent time traveling with Paul and with Peter and these people. And So when they wrote these, the ones that we have, and we have so many copies of, the people who were closest to the events said these are important, not just as history, but also important in our own development as disciples of Jesus. And so, as you said, it's remarkable that there aren't there aren't empires that held on to all of these documents. There were followers of Jesus, often poor, peasant people that were holding on to these documents, and they've survived history. And so, as you said, there was already an agreed upon canon.
Yeah,
Certainly,
we're 300 years afterwards. I mean, everybody agreed on the first 39 of the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Then it was the next 27. All of that. There were a couple of, again, there's people that they did debate over some of them because they weren't, like James is not an original 12, so they debated around him. He's a brother of Jesus, and he was a leader in the early church. But there was a lot of debate around that. Didn't know for sure the authorship of Hebrews,
right?
Yeah.
Certain of the Pauline letters,
but they had historical context. And the other thing that I think, and maybe this doesn't make sense to everybody, but there's a harmony about them. Does it mean all the details are the same? No, but the theology taught in them is the same. Whereas when you get in some of the pseudepigrapha books, you really have to decide if you read. So you read some of the things in one of these Gnostic Gospels, which is a whole nother part.
Yeah.
There's a cult called Gnosticism that believed all the flesh was evil, so Jesus couldn't have been really born in the flesh, which the other Gospels say. So you either have to decide either this is true or this is true. It wasn't like there was one angel at the tomb or two angels at the tomb.
Right.
That's right.
They weren't teaching something different. This is clearly teaching something vastly different than what these are teaching. You can't harmonize the
That's
two.
right. Yes.
You can't harmonize them.
Yes.
And so they're saying this is what historically has been taught for hundreds of years from the original time of Christianity. And these other things, they aren't the same.
Yes.
That's right.
And I think that's where we get confused. And I've talked to people about this because they think, like you said, there's some conspiracy and what you have to look back at is the reason they were left out is because they contradict what has historically been taught. And so it's not that you're missing anything. It's that they weeded it out for you long before you ever got here, so you don't have to worry about that. It's not that it's over there hidden, and that's really what the original disciples believed, and it hasn't been allowed to be out in the open. No, it was excluded for a reason.
Yeah. It's the same reason. Hopefully, the illustration I used again with them was, I hope in 200 years nobody takes the musical Hamilton as being history.
Yeah.
Right.
But is it possible? It's possible.
Yeah.
That somebody's going to go, there's this conspiracy. They really were African Americans who were rapping back in the 1700s. I know that is already happening about the Holocaust, that there's whole white nationalist movements that said it doesn't happen, which is why Jewish people are so serious about not letting it be forgotten, because history has this way over time of people bringing in other things. And if you want to believe in conspiracies and all that, you can easily ignore what is the majority of history to go with this one little thing.
Yes.
Yep.
There's something in us that wants to, when we can't figure things out, that meet with what I already think should be true.
Yeah.
I want to believe a contrary thing, even though the evidence might not be so strong. And then I believe, I really have inside knowledge, which, by the way, is what the Gnostics thought. That's what Gnosticism means. It means hidden knowledge, secret knowledge.
All right. Probably more than they wanted to know, but that's certainly.
We gave them an answer.
That is the answer. All right. Let's switch to Sunday. Sunday, we finally wrapped up the Faith series.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else felt like finally, but
I did.
I know we always feel finally when we're done and can set something aside.
Yeah. That's how I typically, we get bored with stuff real quick.
Yeah, we do.
Because we're in it all the time. So that's just us. But yeah, we did finish up the Faith series, and we're going to be starting something new Sunday. But let's go back. And the big principle that we learned, Ed, you taught us, was that when God calls you to do something out of your comfort zone, something that you feel as if you're ill-equipped to do or that you can't do, you can rest assured you will be provided with the resources of God and the power of God to get that done. And I thought it'd be good for us to dive into that principle. What are your thoughts on it? Have you experienced that in your life, and how do people tend to experience that? How does it work out in real life?
I think every time a person, no matter how small it feels to other people, when you sense that God wants you to do something and it's outside what you would have already done, which is important. Mm-hmm. There's some things that you know you needed to do and you maybe even wanted to do, and you and God happen to be walking the same way. But when there comes a point where there's something I'm pretty sure God wants me to do, but I would not naturally walk over there, mm-hmm. the moment you decide to do it, there is a sense of, I wouldn't have done that without God. When I was doing it, I knew God was with me. Mm-hmm. And it went differently than I thought it would go, even if it didn't go perfect. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in that, you come to realize, I do have a relationship with God that goes beyond, there's things written in a 2,000-year-old book that other people tell me they experienced God. I had an experience with God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It reminded me of, a practical example of that principle is that's been the experience I've had as a father with my children for their whole lives. I cannot tell you how many times my girls have said to me, Dad, I can't do that. And I'm over here going, well, yeah, I know you can, because I'm about to teach you how to do it, and we're going to do. And many times I'm doing it with them,
right?
And then I always love, because we love to say I told you so. I love to come in afterwards and go, so you can't do it after they've just accomplished whatever it is. I think last time it was I was teaching my daughter to do something in the kitchen, cut something up or something in the kitchen. She's like, I don't know how to do that. I can't do that. I'm like, well, come over here. And then she starts doing it, and I go, so you can't do that, huh? It's just, mm-hmm. and it just kind of gives me that look like, okay, yeah, you were right. Now just leave me alone. Shut up. right. But that's how, I think that's the experience that we have with God oftentimes is, God, I don't know how to do that. And he's over there just kind of grinning. It's like, yeah, I know you don't think you can, but you and me get involved in this, and you'd be shocked at what you can do.
I think the image I always had in my head, and this is the incorrect image, so if you missed anything else, this is what it is, that God is often walking with me and then goes, hey, look at that over there. Why don't you go do that? And then I go, oh, that looks scary. I don't want to go do that. And I think that's not the right image. I think what the image is that, Jesus talks about, and this verse is stuck in my head a lot, which is that he says, and you preached on this in our faith series of, I only do what I see the Father doing. He doesn't say, I only do what the Father sends me off all by myself to go do. He goes, Jesus, and constantly you see this. And the reason he answers that is he has just healed a person on the Sabbath, and they're upset. They go, what authority? What gives you the right to do it? And he goes, I only do what I see my Father doing. What he's saying is, the Father was already over there doing that. I saw him at work. I went to go join him in what he was doing. And that's the reason I have the power and the resources to do it, is because he's the one doing it. He's just like, it really is like, and all of us guys have had this experience of you come to your friend's house or you come outside and there's a dude working on a problem, and suddenly 7 guys are all standing around looking at the problem. None of them are doing anything about the problem. We just like to stand there and watch it, and occasionally we go, yep, that's the right, that was good to put that hammer on that nail. I was going to tell you the hammer goes on the nail. We're not doing, the guy's doing all the work, but we felt like we got to be a part of what was going on. And I often feel like that's where Jesus is always in his life. In fact, that's the story you told Sunday about Jesus is walking on the water. The thing that I think Peter got that the other guys didn't get, I don't think it was that just that Peter was somehow braver than the other guys and stepped out. I think Peter was the first guy maybe to notice, oh, that's the Lord. Yeah. Because he's the first one to say, Lord. Mm-hmm. Everyone else, and you told it in the story, they think it's a ghost. Yeah. They're terrified. Peter's the first one, as you said on Sunday, to make the connection. Mm-hmm. Jesus just did something. Mm-hmm. Here's something, as you said, I can't explain. Mm-hmm. I don't know what's going on. Most likely then, maybe it's the guy we've been walking around with who's been healing people. Maybe he's doing whatever this thing is. So when you talk about how I've experienced, that's always in the last few years of my life when I've really understood what the power of prayer is in my life. And it's not somehow mystically I'm going to force God to do something I want him to do. But honestly, what most often happens, and it's not even just that it changes my attitude. It is God revealing to me often, hey, I'm doing this. Why don't you come join me in this, right? Mm-hmm. And I think you mentioned this Sunday. I get this feeling. I literally had this yesterday. I'm looking on my Facebook feed and somebody comes across my Facebook feed and I just feel God go, you haven't talked to that person in a while. That person moved a little while ago. You should contact them. I contacted them, just said, hey, I know with all this crazy thing going on, the first words they said is, your timing is crazy.
Yeah, I know.
Every time that happens to me.
lot.
And I now can look back and see, I think that's God going, hey, I'm doing something right here. And then I find out there's even more backstory of stuff going on over and over and over again. When I go, God, what do I want you to do and join me in it? It's, what are you doing? Let me join you.
Well,
So-
I think there's two parts to that we have to be really, I think maybe this is not. This is the way I understand it. God is doing things. God did want that person. Maybe there's something going on in that person's life you contacted. Could you have ignored it? Would God have sent somebody else? He probably would have tried.
Yeah.
Is it possible that everybody said no? And would God have accomplished it without you? No. Because the truth is, God wants everybody on the planet to be fed. And has provided more than enough food. There isn't a population problem. There is a hoarding problem.
Yes, that's right.
There's not a problem with God didn't provide enough for every one of the 7 point whatever billion people on the planet. It's just that some of us have decided, not only do I want to have enough beyond what I can eat, but I also want my dog to be fat. I want to be fat. I want them to be fat. And then I want to throw other stuff away.
Yeah.
And we can pray for God to feed those people, and God prompts us often to, and we're like, and he doesn't just rain manna from heaven. Could he? He could. He has decided to work through the hands of his people. And that's, I always want to say to people, why doesn't God do something? God's trying to do something. You asking the question is probably him prompting you to do something. You noticed it.
Yeah, that thing in you that causes you to ask that question of feeling that if it's an injustice or just a compassion, I believe you're right. That is the Holy Spirit, God's prompting of, hey, this is a problem. Why don't you get involved and help me fix this?
Well, and I think, and this may be taking us in a direction we don't want to go, so we can drop it if so. But there's this thing, and I know we all are big readers and fans of N.T. Wright, and he often talks about this theological term of the scandal of particularity, that God. I have people ask me this a lot of, why doesn't God just show up and reveal himself? And we've talked about, the whole idea of God's wanting us to find him and all that. But I think a lot of people have a hard time with, why did Jesus just show up 2,000 years ago in this specific place, right? When he could have been shown up 2,000 years later and been televised and, everyone's seen it. And there's this thing of, God started with a man, Abraham, we talked that, then built a family, then built a nation, then through that nation. He didn't come through all the nations. He did come for all the nations, but he comes through to Jesus. And in the same way, in this particularity, God does say, my plan A for the world is people. I'm going to work through people. So there is this part of and we have this thought because of the way our minds work. Well, if I was God, I would just bypass the people.
Of course.
I would just, as you said, I'd rain down food for everyone. If you won't feed them, I'll feed them. But God says, just like he goes, hey, I'm going to work particularly through Israel. And Israel, if you ever read the Old Testament, got it wrong over and over and over. And they were horrible representatives of his. And then Jesus comes in, he's the right representative. But then we know from church history, churches and Christians over and over again have not gotten it. We've not always gone around and fed people like we were supposed to. But still, God says, I believe I'm going to work through these people, and I'm going to continue to, as you said, prompt and do that. And so there's this level for some of us that we go, well, that doesn't even sound like God, right? Because God's supposed to just come in and make it happen.
It doesn't sound like the God you created in your head.
Right.
But let's be clear, it does sound like Jesus.
It does.
Because Jesus lived a servant, self-sacrificial, laid down his life and was mistreated and treated unjustly. And so here we are with, it all fits. This goes back to Greg Boyd's cruciform theology that we talk about on here a lot. That is the nature of God. We don't like it.
There's a willingness to be misunderstood in God. There's a willingness to be patient. And allow things that I would never allow because I want something to happen.
Yes.
And my view is, I want it to happen now.
Yes.
And in the way I want.
God's primary project is not this planet. God's primary project is us. It's us working at this and the planet. He loves the planet.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we are the whole thing. We are his representatives, and he is at work. He just allows us to thwart it by deciding, no, I don't want to do that.
Well, I love this.
I just don't want to do that.
I love this term that I know we've talked about before of the God who risks, that God is taking a risk on us by saying, like you said, I'm going to prompt you. Well, they didn't do it. And then God goes, okay, I'm going to prompt the next person I'm going to go. But it's amazing. The prayer Jesus asked us to pray is, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, which means I'm at least acknowledging there are times, and we know this. Anyone who thinks about it knows that God's will doesn't get done, which we all know because I know I've not always done God's will. I know I've gone completely intentionally opposite of God's will, and he didn't stop me.
Somebody will say, this terrible thing happened. Why didn't God just stop it? And I say, well, let's move back a little bit. Have you ever done something that was wrong? Yeah, well then, God should have stopped you.
He should have stopped you. Yeah.
God should have stopped you. And if God's constantly stopping everything, then we're not really human anymore.
And we're not free.
He has decided. So he can't decide, I'm just going to stop these big things because then the things you think are big are things I don't think are as big. And then other people think something else is bigger and something else is smaller. God just decided the big thing is that I'm going to allow them to love me, which has to be freely chosen, which means they can also decide not to love me. And they can even blame me for stuff that they do that I allowed to happen in the name of love.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what is it that keeps us from when we get those moments, God calls us out of our comfort zone? What is it that keeps us from going with him and experiencing his power? If we know that intellectually, where's that disconnect for you guys?
I think it's that our highest priority is our comfort zone. I think, and you mentioned it Sunday kind of, and I can't remember if it was kind of like an ad lib. So I don't remember if you said it in the online thing, but you were talking about you using the example of a boat and kind of facetiously going on about, I've built my boat and I love my boat and I'm comfortable with my boat. For most of us, and I can't speak to other countries, and so people, if you're watching this somewhere who's not in America, I don't know if this is your experience. Maybe it is, but I certainly know for most of us Americans, that's what we think the goal of life is.
Yes.
That's why we push our kids, go to college and get these so you can get the kind of job you need, not even really because we believe the job is somehow great. It's because the job's going to lead you to a better life. And our goal is that at any point, we may not have it in our head that by 65, when I retire, I have built myself this comfortable life that I can just, kind of stave off death for a while. I'm really terrified of that, and get myself to this very comfortable experience. And so it almost seems, once again, in the God that I make up, God would never call me out of that. That God's goal is, he may call me out of it for a moment, so that it teaches me like a lesson, but then I always get to come back to the boat. Because I always wonder, in the story you're talking about Sunday, maybe Peter was never coming back to the boat. Maybe if Peter kept walking, him and Jesus would have walked the whole way across.
Maybe they would have walked on across, and and Jesus would have said, "You had your shot, guys. I guess keep on rowing."
I'll see you when you get. You know what I mean? Like,
it's a good thought.
That we always Peter had to come back to the boat because of he ends up seeing the storms of that whole deal, but. That's what we want. Is I want a week-long mission trip where I step outside my comfort zone and I go for a little bit, and then I come back to my boat and I go, wasn't that? And don't I feel better about myself? I want to step out of my comfort zone and post something on social media and say my thing, and then I just come right back into my comfort zone.
I honestly think comfort and control are. And so I think ultimately what we want is control. Because there are things that some of us choose that would be uncomfortable for other people. But because I chose it, it's comfortable for me.
Sure.
Like I know people, we've had some people at our church that choose to not live in houses. I can think of 2 different people in the last couple of years that I know of that have chosen to live in tents. They have income. They live in tents on public property because they can, and they want to be free. Some of y'all want to be free. You go, I don't want to be that free.
That's right.
I don't want to be that free. But And other people look at them as irresponsible. Well, no, that's a form of control for them.
And that's a form of comfort for them. The control is comfort.
And so I think the ultimate thing for us is control. I think way more than we would like to admit. Most of us want to use God more than know God. And really what we want to use God for is anything we can't control. So I can't do much about my kid who's an adult and he's a drunk or a drug addict. So I want to faith on that.
Yeah, I'm going to pray for that one.
I can't do anything about my teenager. I've tried real hard. I first laid into that, train them up in the way they should go. And then when I can't do nothing, then when they're old, they won't come back. Well, of course, you misunderstood the verse, but whatever. Anyway, we want some more. And ultimately, none of us can control death or cancer or any of those things. So I think most of us tend to think of Jesus as Secretary General of Afterlife Affairs more than anything else. He might play a little bit in this area, but only if I really need him to. I can take care of most of my stuff. I can take care of.
Yeah.
Well, I just heard this on a podcast. I think they said that most of what American Christianity has become is the American dream with just enough Jesus attached to it to make it sound legitimate.
Yeah. Get a little Jesus dressing on the side. I don't want Jesus all over my salad. Give me just a little bit that I can control how much I put Jesus on my life.
The stuff that I can control, I got this part.
Yeah.
But this stuff that you mentioned, death and sickness and disease and my kids and their behaviors, that I can't do anything with, and that I want Jesus to get involved in.
It's why, and this is not a shot at this because it's a marketing thing. It's why Christian radio is not about, let me give you music that will help you grow closer to Jesus. It's about something safe for the whole family.
Yeah.
Christianity is safe for the whole family, of course, unless Jesus calls your kid to get out of the boat.
That's right.
And you're like, Jesus, I just taught him to be in the boat.
Yeah,
I don't want my kid out of the boat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I do think that's true for some degree. And so when you think about the thing you talked about there of, and what you were speaking to too, in American Christianity, by and large, most of us believe what Jesus is doing is building up my life. That he is somehow coming in to bless what I got going on and all the different plans and agendas that I have going on. And you're right. I think so. What I need is I'm going to build my business the way I want to build it. And anything that I can't control, I'm going to rely on Jesus for, or I'm going to build my family the way I think's best. And then I'll throw some Jesus in on the side, not the way that Jesus invites them to, which he says, hey, the kingdom of God is here and it's advancing. Why don't you get about doing that work, my Father's work, right? My Father's doing business. Are you out there joining him in that? And it really is a complete switch of mind.
I think for many of us, like the illustration Nathan used earlier, was a relational thing. There's a person, I sense I should talk to them. I'll give you an illustration. I'm guessing many of the people listening are community Christian people, and you've been in a small group. This happens for 30 years. I've seen this kind of thing happen in a group. And this goes to the control thing. We're a small group, and over time, I begin to notice there's something going on between Jason and his wife, and it's really unhealthy for them. It does impact our group in that one of them talks to one person, one talks to the other person. It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. I feel prompted at some point to say something.
Yeah.
I feel prompted to say something. But the act of saying something doesn't really do much for my life. And I can't imagine Jesus calling me to do something that uncomfortable sheerly for the benefit of the other person. It's better for me to just be quiet, ignore them for the hour, or if they begin to bug me a lot, I just stop going to small group or go to a different church or whatever. I cannot imagine that would ever happen. So we don't say yes to that. And then I don't know if people don't believe this or not, but I've said it I believe it because I've seen it in my own life. If you say no enough to those little relational things and you want God to tell you some big thing about your business, God, I honestly believe God's like, hey, I already gave you something to do.
That's right.
Why don't you go do that, and then we'll see about your business.
That's the parable of the talents.
That is.
That is
That's
what
right.
it is.
Yeah.
God gives you a little bit, and what you do with the little bit determines if you're going to get more.
Yes.
Well, it's even the
I want to know about my business. I want to know about my money. I don't care about this family. I want to know about my teenager. And God's like, hey, I pointed this out to you,
Yes.
and you already proved to me you don't really care what I want.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, it's because ultimately, and that gets another thing. When you said parable, it made me think of it. It's even the point, and I think we had this question, so you can probably go back and hear a longer one, but about why Jesus spoke in parables. Jesus makes clear at one point, he quotes this thing of, they who have ears to hear and, all that kind of eyes to see, that whole point that he's saying, I really am putting out these little promptings to people and seeing, will they care enough? Do they want to follow enough that they'll come in and want to hear more and want to do more? And it's the same with the promptings that ultimately would, and see, this is what's hard for us is we go, well, why wouldn't he just speak clearly and say, these are the 4 steps you got to take to get to go to heaven, or these are the 4 steps you got to take to do the thing? Because in our mind, once again, our view of religion and Christianity is there are things I got to know, right? And there are probably a couple things I got to do, but by and large, it's about what I know and what I believe. And what Jesus said is, I'm looking to see, where does your allegiance lie? Are you with me? Are you willing to come do my work with me? So like you said in the parable of the talents, is I give you this little bit. And he says, those who are faithful with a little will be trusted with more, right? And this idea of our hearts being hardened. And all of us think, well, my heart's not hardened. I'm not.
I go to church, I sing songs, and it makes me cry.
I say, I feel so.
I watch Hallmark movies on TV, and I bawl like a baby. My heart is super soft.
I see commercials to help starving kids, and I feel really bad. I never go do anything for those starving kids, but I feel really bad. I feel something. Therefore, my heart's not hardened. And what Jesus is constantly, what God's trying to do, once again, because it's free will, he's not going to overwhelm us with knowledge to the point that we go, well, now I'm forced to do it because I have no other option. He's allowing us to be governed by whatever we want to be governed by, whether it's him or my own,
Ourselves.
my own
Just
sense of
ourselves.
control. Yeah.
And I think even the question about how do I get to heaven and what are the steps, the reason we think that's what the Bible is about is because it's the one thing we can't control. So we go to it looking for it. If you just read the book and try to find where that's answered, the reason it's not
much.
clear is because it's about you becoming the kind of person that can do life with God. And of course, if you do life with God, since he's eternal, when you die, you just keep doing life with God.
Yeah.
But if all you're interested in is solving this one thing you can't solve, God's like, hey, I got lots of stuff I'm interested in. Why don't you be interested in what I'm interested in?
Yes.
I'm interested in you. Why don't you be interested in me?
Mm-hmm.
That's an awesome concept. That reminds me of the, what Dallas said when he talked about what it would be like when he dies.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And he talked about, I suspect that it will be quite some time before I realize it. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah, the first time I heard that, I had to think about it for a while, what he meant.
Oh, me too.
It didn't occur to me that what he meant is I try to live my life so in the presence of Jesus every moment. Being dead for the follower of Christ is in the presence of Jesus.
Yeah.
He said, I'm trying to live my life in that presence. Maybe a little while before I realized, Jesus, or, look, I just traveled 100 miles in a moment. I didn't realize.
Great.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And that idea, too, of just we won't taste the sting of death, that this idea of, and he tells this story, which I think, and Dallas really hit on this a lot of, he tells the story of a young girl, I think it's in India, who was dying, and she had this horrible disease. She's like, I think 5 or 6 at the time, he said, and she's in this terrible pain, kind of groaning over the whole thing. He said, then all of a sudden, and we've all, if you were here for our Imagine Heaven series, which you can find on our YouTube channel if you weren't, where people talked about their near-death experiences of kind of getting glimpses of what heaven will be like. She had a similar experience where she's getting close. And he says this little 5 or 6-year-old girl, she starts just looking kind of away. And suddenly what was a face grimacing in pain becomes delighted with joy. She's laughing. She's staring off at it, and then suddenly starts looking around at her little 4 and 5-year-old's friends, just saying bye, and starts looking and just is giggling and laughing. And Dallas, we know for people who were there, his final words were, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." This feeling of and what he mentioned was, and this was written by missionary who was there said, if that's what the spray of the ocean is like, what would it be like to be submerged in it? And she's talking about if that's just the kind of closeness we get from being on the beach of what eternity is like. And so Dallas follows that story up by saying, so did that little girl taste the sting of death? And I think that's totally true. This idea that I'm just walking, and there is something, we've all seen this with children, that they just have almost this inherent kind of closeness with that or sensitivity, I should say, to the promptings of God. And he's just saying that as they're kind of getting drawn into this, and that's the life that Jesus promises us, like you said, that maybe I wouldn't even notice, and it would just things get better and better, and then one day I look back and I go, oh wow,
Wow. That went somewhere I wasn't expecting, but I love it. All right,
I love that too.
yeah, man. All right, do you have something to end us with today? Or are we done?
I don't.
You don't, so
I
we're
do
done.
not. I did not prepare anything. I apologize.
well, that's all right.
We're saving your voice,
I
That's all
guess
it
that's what
is.
it was doing.
That's all it is.
I apologize.
but you're not speaking Sunday, so
I'm not, so
That's
I'll
not.
be easier on that. Yes.
you're up.
I'm up. I'm
On a
up.
new series.
New
right.
series, The Good Life. That's what we're calling it.
Oh,
So,
good life.
Oh
The good
boy,
life, so.
I bet it's not what we think it is.
No. Well, I don't know. I don't know what you.
I don't know what you think it is.
But
we'll find out.
You'll find out. It's great. We're
I have
talking.
read the first message. It's a good one.
So there you go.
I will be reading it because I have to write small group.
There you go. You'll
I will read it
You'll
here
get
in
to
just a little bit. So, all
you
right, great. See you guys.
See y'all
Next week.
Bye, everybody.